Last two applications, please make your way into the hallway if you'd like to continue the conversations. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to start the next hearing, so we would ask you to please either take a seat or to excuse yourselves into the hallway. Thank you. Mr. Rivera.
Application of Mineola 212 LLC for a special permit pursuant to Chapter 550 of the Code of the Incorporated Village of Mineola entitled Zoning, Section 550-15.1 entitled Downtown Overlay District to construct a 9-story, 121-unit residential building upon the property known as 212-214 3rd Street, Mineola, New York, known and designated on the Nassau County Land and Tax Map as Section 9, Block 674, Lots 2, 3, 5, 10 through 12.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Rivera. Mr. O'Keefe, affidavit of mailings. Yes. Thank you. Mr. Gibbons.
Yes, the Nassau County Planning Commission is hearing this application tomorrow, so it is not ready to vote, and I would ask for a resolution declaring this an unlisted action under CEQA.
Entertain a motion.
Motion.
Motion by trustee Solosky. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by deputy mayor Sartori. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay, so what essentially that means is that we will not be able to vote on this tonight until such time as the Nassau County Planning Commission hears this application, which in this case happens to be tomorrow. So this application, just like the other ones, will have a presentation. And if you approach the podium, please identify yourself and your relationship to the application. Mr. Martins?
Thank you, Mayor. Glad to see the board is in a good mood tonight. Thank you very much for that. Good evening, Mayor, members of the board, council. My name is Jack Martins. I'm a member of Harris Beach with offices at 333 Earl Ovington Boulevard in Uniondale, New York. I appear here tonight on behalf of the applicant, Mineola 212 LLC, for the project which has been named The Bridge. Here with me this evening are Ross Levine and Adam Mann, the project's developers. In addition, we have the design professionals responsible for the building's design, Bill Novak, an architect and principal of William C. Novak Architect PC, David Wortman and Kevin Walsh, professional engineers with VHB Engineering, who will speak to the seeker analysis, and Frank Filichudo from Creighton Manning Engineering LLP, who will speak to the traffic analysis performed for the application. As was mentioned, the project is located at 212-214 3rd Street. Here in the village, the tax map designation is Section 9, Block 674, Lots 2, 3, 5, 10, 11, and 12. The property is bounded on the north and east by Station Road, including the area immediately adjacent to the Long Island Railroad station, as well as the continuation of Station Road along the east side, along the bridge, as it hits 3rd Street and 3rd Street to the south. It is immediately south and across the street from Mineola's Long Island Railroad Station, and comprises the easterly half of that block. For those of us who have been here for a while, it is the balance of the block east of the Astoria building, and where we used to have a taxi stand. For those of us who go back far enough, it used to be the bus depot on 3rd Street, and it used to be a small attorney's office on the corner of Mineola Boulevard and 3rd Street, Sullivan and Leopakis at the time. The property is located within the village's B3 or Special Office District, and as modified by the Downtown Overlay District, what was formerly known as the Development Incentive Bonus Overlay District. The B3 district would allow for office use predominantly, whether it's offices that cater to our court system, attorneys' offices, or to our medical offices tied to the hospital, which have historically been located in this area, and some of the buildings in the area kind of speak to that as well. The application is made pursuant to Mineola Village Zoning Code, Section 550-15.1, which authorizes the Board of Trustees to consider each application on a case-by-case basis in light of the overall vision for the overlay district as set forth in the comprehensive master plan. The master plan was commissioned by the Village of Mineola back in 2005, and frankly, the downtown revitalization efforts since undertaken by the village are a result of that master plan and visioning. Through the downtown overlay zone, the board is authorized to ease various technical use and dimensional requirements of the code, which would otherwise make any such revitalization efforts impossible. In exchange, pursuant to Zoning Code 550-15.1, applicants are to provide either public amenities or facilities or payments in lieu, again, on a case-by-case basis, in light of the size, scope of the development, and degree of relief requested. In this case, the applicant is requesting relaxation of setbacks, lot coverage, unit sizes, height, and as noted in the village's notice of denial. This application is to replace the existing buildings, which, as I mentioned, include the taxi stand, the former bus depot, and some vacant buildings. The village prepared a 2015 report as a follow-up to its 2005 master plan. And I think it bears mentioning that this project in 2015 was referenced in that report. Why? It was being discussed at that time. Here we are nearly 8 years later. It was a different project, different scale. As a matter of fact, in that 2015 report, which I'll be referencing again through my comments today, it is mentioned as a 150-unit proposal. Well, the proposal we have before us today is significantly smaller. It's 120 units, and I think it's important to just recognize the changes to this project over time as it has been, frankly, catered not only to the location, but to the concerns that had been voiced previously as to size and scope. And I think it's a much better project as a result, and we can get into some of those particulars now. The proposal is for a mixed-use building with 121 residential units and a 10,000 square foot public-private event entertainment space on the ground floor facing Station Road, so immediately across the street from the Long Island Railroad Station. It is, again, consistent with the 2005 master plan and consistent with the 2015 evaluation by the village and its consultant. The key findings for that 2015 study, and I think it's important because if you recall back in 2015, the village had a number of projects underway and wanted to take a look to see which projects had been developed, which projects may be in the pipeline, what would be the impact of moving forward. There were projects that had been approved, some very large projects, certainly significantly larger than the project that's being proposed here today. But the opportunity for the village to take a look and say, okay, let's take a breath and figure out whether or not we're heading in the right direction, whether or not there needs to be a course adjustment, and brought in the same consultants that had consulted with regard to the 2005 master plan and put together this report. And Mayor, with your permission, I'd like the report also to be referenced in the record and included, but I'm just going to read what the report had as its key findings, because there are a number of points that I think are relevant specifically to this project. So the report's key findings can be summarized as follows, and I'm reading from the report at page 1. Downtown transit-oriented multifamily dwellings have lesser impacts on a per-unit basis than typical suburban single-family homes and generate fewer residents per unit, particularly in terms of school-aged children. Second point, The existing development incentive bonus overlay district for the downtown area is an effective tool for encouraging appropriate development in the downtown while providing the village with more control over the type, form, and appearance of new development than is possible with standard zoning. 3, the potential addition of a few thousand new residents in downtown would benefit local businesses by bringing in potential new customers, particularly evenings and weekends, and would help make the area more vibrant. And I think apropos to the application that was just presented to this board, the fact that there is a 4,000 square foot application, literally a stone's throw from this project, that I think is only enhanced by this type of development, is not only a testament to, I think, the original thinking behind the master plan and the board's thinking in moving forward, but it also goes on to say, it is difficult to determine an exact threshold as to how much development is too much, which I think is a question that had come up at the time and certainly a question that comes up from time to time. Instead, the most intense development should be focused on areas closer to the railroad station. Within a quarter-mile radius, with less in outlying areas, development regulations could set the effective limit through caps on height and/or units, as well as by continuing to mandate the provisions of adequate parking spaces in each new development. So, as per the report that the village prepared in 2015, frankly, it was pointing to exactly the spot we're talking about today. The area immediately adjacent to the train station, on the south side of the tracks, where there is commercial development, there's office space, but the residential development right there with the kind of event space that's being proposed today, I think offers an alternative to certainly what's there today. Certainly the, and I'm gonna say the eyesore that is the abandoned cabs or taxi stand and the buildings that are there. And the village train station being a gateway to the village, the importance of putting a quality, world-class building here, I think, cannot be overstated. In the report's conclusions, the same report in 2015, it noted, and very few people remember this, but that there were 3,000 fewer people living in Mineola in 2010 than in 1970. 3,000 fewer people in 2010 than in 1970, and a decrease of 14%, and again reiterates the importance of multifamily development in reaching critical mass for the support of new retail and services. So for those of us who have seen this village over the years, I was not familiar with there being a $3,000 person reduction in population in those 40 years. But thinking back on it, again, as you calculate the census every 10 years, that was pretty startling. And the fact that the amenities that were built back then for a higher population have begun to deteriorate. They've run their course, and the ability to reinvest in the community in a way that allows for a revitalized housing stock, I think, can't also be overstated. We've all heard a lot over the last several years, and certainly over the last several months, about the housing shortage and the need for housing stock and building affordable housing and choices in housing in our downtowns. A lot of that has come from the state. A lot of that comes from regional organizations discussing what we need. But the reality is Mineola has been doing it as far back as 2005 with the development of its master plan and the visioning that went into that and the input that came in from the community. And frankly, I think if anything can be brought or taken from that 2015 report, it's that we're not done yet. In order to actually create the kind of housing diversity and stock that we need to support a vibrant business community and retail community, especially as we get closer to the train station, that's why this project makes all the sense in the world. So before we discuss the standards applicable to granting a special permit under the village code, I would like to introduce Bill Novak. Bill Novak is the project's architect, and he's going to discuss the particulars of the project, the aesthetics, the unit counts, the number of one-bedroom units as opposed to, studios or twos, the breakout, why the building is being designed as it is, and what went into the thought behind it. I'll just leave you before I introduce and bring Mr. Novak up. There are different ways of putting up a building. There are people that you've seen and we've seen that'll put up a building and come in with a rectangle and put it right there, right up against the sidewalk, and you have nothing but a sheer wall on the sidewalk. And others to maximize the unit count. There are others that will step the building back and take architectural liberties with regard to building a aesthetically better building, a nicer building that's going to fit in with the aesthetics of the village, and those things take into consideration not just height, but how the building will sit on the site and what it will look like from those areas where it's going to be impacting the community most. In this case, I would just point out that the architectural elements are important. The way that the building is stepped back is important, because rather than building a building or proposing a building that is built right up on the sidewalk, right up on Station Road, right up on the platform of the Long Island Railroad, the building has certain elements, which Mr. Novak will get into, that led to the building being leaner, and it may be 10 feet higher than we would otherwise need to make it. But for those 10 feet, that building gets stepped back away from the train station, gets pushed away. There isn't the massing that we're talking about. And if you look at those architectural elements, and I would urge you to consider that because they are important. You only get one chance to put up a building. That building, if it's approved, is going to be there for the next 100 years. That building and those elements are important, especially when we're talking about how it's going to impact that station. So with that and with that workup, I'll introduce Mr. Novak.
Good evening, Board. William Novak, architect for the project. From the beginning of the design process, the whole development team was focused on two essential objectives for the design of this project. One, that the building and its massing were additive to the overall experience and feeling of the train envelope. Actually, how people would feel and what the project would look like while standing in the train corridor waiting for that train. Two, making sure the building fits in and complements the area and surrounding buildings. To accomplish this, some key design elements were incorporated. Most importantly, moving as much of the building mass as possible off the track envelope and towards 3rd Street to create as much light and air within the track corridor as possible and keep the track area airy and vibrant. To achieve this goal, a 54 by 82 foot deep courtyard was introduced on the 3rd floor. And can I point to the model? Which I think is best depicted in the model. For context, Station Road, immediately in front of the property, is only 20 feet wide. The courtyard is 2.5 times as wide and 4 times as deep as the street immediately in front of the property. A combination of red brick and white precast with bronze accents was selected for the exterior of the facade to blend in with the white buildings on either side of the property, while also coordinating with the red brick of the new MTA crossover bridge, the Mineola Boulevard Bridge, and Morgan Park, all prominent structures within the track envelope. The intent of the design team, together with the developer, was to create a current yet timeless building that is appealing to today's market, but will also stand the test of time and become a landmark in the village for years to come. In terms of the programming, the building will consist of 121 units, 65 one-bedroom, 24 one-bedroom half-bath, and 32 two-bedroom. Some units will also include dens and outdoor balconies or terraces. Amenity spaces are proposed throughout the building, including a gym, tenant lounge, a rooftop pool, as well as over a 4,000 square foot landscaped courtyard. We and the whole development team have worked extremely hard to try to deliver the village as a project that the village and board could be proud of. If you have any questions at this time, we'd be happy to answer them, and we thank you very much for your time tonight.
So the application seeks 121 units. With that, there'll be 195 proposed parking spots, which is greater than the 1.5 spots per unit that has been customarily required as part of these developments. I want to just point out that part of the effort, and Mr. Novak spoke to this a few moments ago, we actually explored the idea of an 8-story building, making it 10 feet smaller in height. And to do that, as I mentioned before, the building would be massed differently. The courtyard and the portions of the building that are pushed away from from Station Plaza would be pushed back. We would still have the same 121 units. It wouldn't address less or more. We're not asking for greater yield. This isn't about creating more apartments. It's a question of putting the apartments and in a proper design that is respectful of the community in a way that I think is unique. Because when you're at the train station, you don't have houses in that area. As a matter of fact, you can go as far south as Old Country Road, and then beyond that to the court system and the county court buildings. The impacts of a building and that 10-foot differential, I would argue, would really be inconsequential in light of the architectural elements that have actually been proposed and drawn into this building. So there are people who will focus on absolute height, 80 feet, 90 feet, whatever it happens to be. And I would just urge the board to consider in this context, without the immediacy of any single-family residential homes in the immediate area, if there isn't a greater yield and therefore a greater impact to the community, that we consider the architectural elements that are being proposed and prioritize those. Because if the impact of this building is its residents and the number of people who are coming and going, whether it's 10 feet taller or shorter, is less important than whether the building is aesthetically going to fit with the village's downtown. And that's just a consideration that I hope the board would consider as part of its deliberations. Along with and in support of the application, we have also submitted an expanded environmental assessment, which was dated in March of 2023. It was prepared by VHB Engineering. I would like to introduce Mr. Wortman and Mr. Walsh. Mr. Wortman is a senior environmental manager at VHB who will discuss the expanded environmental assessment prepared for this proposed project. The board has been presented with a copy of the expanded environmental assessment. Certainly the details are there. It's a pretty thick binder for everyone to consider.
Thank you very much for that, Mr. Martin.
I will just take a moment, and Mr. Wortman, if you give me just a second. I love those books. I really do. And for those who've had an opportunity to look at them, and I know not everyone has, but the detail that's in them, stuff that you think you live in a place all your life and you're familiar with it, and then you start reading these environmental assessments and expanded assessments, and there's a lot of really great information in those books that I think are worth reading sooner or later. Maybe we can make them available at the library for those who may want to research and read it. But there's a lot of good local information that you wouldn't otherwise have access to. With that, Mr. Wortman, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Martins. Again, for the record, my name is David Wortman. I'm a senior environmental manager with VHB, with offices at 100 Motor Parkway in Hauppauge, New York. I think Mr. Martins has set the bar pretty high as far as what the document does, but let me talk a little bit about that. VHB was retained by the applicant to prepare a Part 1 full environmental assessment form, which was submitted as part of the application materials before you. And as Mr. Martins mentioned, we have also prepared and submitted an expanded environmental assessment report, which supplements the Part 1 EAF and which provides detailed information and analysis with regard to a broad range of environmental impact topics. To complete our work, we reviewed the proposed site plans and architectural drawings, published environmental maps and data, the relevant comprehensive plans, some of which Mr. Martin spoke from earlier. We undertook site and area inspections throughout the subject property, its surroundings, this portion of the village. And as well, we had undertaken consultations with service providers. Specifically, the expanded environmental assessment document contains a detailed description of the proposed action, a summary of the purpose, need, and benefits of the proposed action, analyses of potential land use and zoning impacts, consistency with those relevant comprehensive plans, the village's master plan, and that housing report included. We also evaluated impacts on community service providers and utilities, impacts related to aesthetics and visual resources, including a shadow analysis, perspective renderings of the proposed development are used there, and impacts on traffic and parking. You'll hear more in a moment, I believe, from the traffic engineer on the team about the latter in just a moment. I won't attempt to summarize all of the information. As Mr. Martins explained, it's a bit of a lengthy document. But I would like to just offer a few of the key conclusions for your consideration today. This proposed land use, consisting of a mixed-use transit-oriented development adjacent to the Long Island Railroad Station, would be consistent with the pattern of development that's emerged in this portion of the village, and what has become established as the neighborhood character in this area. The proposed action is consistent with the recommendations of the relevant comprehensive land use plans and analyses, including the 2005 comprehensive plan for the village of Mineola, where they describe the need for alternatives to single-family residential development, and particularly in the downtown, where adequate access to transit and infrastructure exists. As well, the 2015 evaluation of multifamily residential development capacity in the village, which speaks to the need to establish that critical mass, which Mr. Martins has covered a bunch of. Additionally, we document that respectfully, the proposed action meets the standards for the granting of special permit and the requested development incentive bonuses that are before the board for its consideration today. For those of you familiar with the site, it's developed in its existing condition. It doesn't contain any significant natural areas or sensitive resources in that regard. Overall, the results of our full environmental assessment form and the expanded EA report respectfully indicate that the proposed action would not have the potential to result in a significant adverse environmental impact on the environment. Earlier, Mr. Gibbons indicated that the proposed action is an unlisted action, which means that at the appropriate time, this board will be asked to make a determination of environmental significance, and we would respectfully refer the board to the contents of the EAF and expanded EA in its considerations of that. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have regarding environmental impacts and the expanded EA document. Thank you for your time. You got it.
As Mr. Wortman mentioned, a portion of the expanded environmental assessment, specifically with regard to traffic and parking, was prepared by Creighton Manning Engineering, LLP. And allow me to introduce Frank Filiciuto to speak to these issues. Mr. Filiciuto.
Sure. Good evening, Mayor, trustees. Good evening. For the record, Frank Filiciotto, F as in Frank, I-L-I-C-I-O-T-T-O. I'm with the firm Creighton Manning Engineering, offices at 145 Main Street, Ossining, New York. I'm a licensed professional engineer in New York State. I have over 20 years of experience in the field of traffic and transportation planning, engineering, site design, land use. It's a pleasure to be here tonight. One of the things that excites me about my industry specifically is transit-oriented development. It's one of the types of development that we as traffic engineers get to really look at from a multifaceted standpoint, how the train station, how the transit around the site interacts with the building that it otherwise wouldn't if it were a half mile or a mile away. And so this project, and I think Mr. Martin set me up nicely when he summarized the report from 2015 about how transit-oriented developments are just a little bit less on the traffic side. They just generate a little bit less. There's less demand for trip generation. There's less demand for parking. They just overall have that calmer effect on the environment because the need to use the car is less when there's the option to have transit. And this site in particular, being only 100 or so feet from the station, allows that future resident to have that option. Whereas, again, if you're a quarter mile, even a half mile away from the site, you really wouldn't have that staring you in the face every day. So, little anecdote, it's not something I get to do every day. A lot of the projects that I work on are not TODs, and you're dealing with a lot of other components and issues, but this is an exciting project for us. We're happy to be part of the team. Just to summarize a couple of the key points, 121 units is one of the key factors in how we determined how much traffic, how much parking this particular site would generate. The Institute of Transportation Engineers is our sort of governing body in our niche within civil engineering, and they publish a wide variety of data on a number of land uses, anything from commercial to institutional to residential to retail to you name it. Within that data set is a land use called Land Use 221, multifamily housing mid-rise being anything from 3 stories to 9. And there's a specific subset of that data that deals with these types of developments near transit. So that data speaks directly to the fact that a building could be located within close proximity to a major transit facility. I'm not talking about a bus stop on the side of a road in a more rural part of Suffolk County. I'm talking about being next to what is a hub, essentially, in Nassau County. So the fact that the site has alternative means of transportation overall reduces the amount of traffic in and outs that can be expected. So when you would look at a 121 unit building in a typical suburb, the generation of traffic on this particular site will be much less, to the tune of, in the peak hour, 54 vehicle trips. And that occurs on a Saturday in the midday period. It's less during the morning commute, 39, and these are vehicle trips, and in the evening, 35. And when you think about that, if you have a wide variety of people commuting by train, with this particular site, you never even have to get in your car. You're not commuting to a parking lot and then parking and walking to the station. You're literally just walking across the platform. What we did was we did a pretty comprehensive study, though. We knew that the trip generation was going to be relatively low, even when you consider 121 units, but we wanted to just verify that its impact on the site would not be significant, or impact on the surrounding roadways would not be significant. So we looked at the 4 intersections nearest the site, and I'm sure the board is familiar with some of the one-waying that happens on 3rd Street and then it kind of loops you around Station Road. And if you're familiar with the site plan, we have a subterranean garage where there's 195 spaces that will be accessed on 3rd Street. And the one-way around Station will also provide access to a porte-cochere, kind of like a drop-off kind of lobby area. So we analyzed how traffic would circulate in that fashion, and then we distributed within the roadway network. We looked at Old Country Road and Franklin Avenue, that key intersection right there. We looked at Old Country Road and 3rd Street, Old Country Road and 3rd Avenue, and then, of course, 3rd Street and 3rd Avenue. And what we found is, generally speaking, current levels are acceptable. There are certain times when certain movements are more constrained, like left turns during certain peak hours, but generally, the intersection of Old Country Road and Franklin operated at an acceptable level of service D. What we then did was we put that traffic load, that, you know, the 54 trips, the 35 trips, the 39 trips on that existing condition, and we forecasted it out into the future. And when you distribute that traffic through the roadway network, your impact on any one intersection is relatively minimal. We're not talking about a lot of traffic to begin with. When you spread it out, it's even less. Just for comparison's sake, the New York State Department of Transportation and the ITE, that institute that I mentioned earlier, sets the 100-trip threshold as sort of the bar. It's an informal way to kind of determine if a site's going to be impactful or not from a traffic perspective. So 100 trips, we're at 54, much less. In terms of parking, we're code compliant. We exceed the 1.5 spaces per unit that the village requires. I just want to put that in perspective a little bit. I've been part of some other TODs in other areas of the metro area where 1 space per unit has become a, quote, standard, or at least an accepted amount. So I think we're well parked here. Certainly parking should not be a concern based on the fact that the type of development, the transit-oriented development, is also going to self-select some of the residents. There's going to be residents who don't have a car because they want to live in a building that's accessible to trains. So I think we're well parked. In general, this project will not have a significant adverse impact on traffic or parking. Just to double check parking in the general area, we also studied the intermodal center garage on the other side of 3rd, just to check, you know, how that's used. There's a total of 935 parking spaces in that garage. We found that the peak demand there during the weekday evening period, which is roughly when people are getting out of work, but right before the rush from the train, peak demand was 71% utilization. So there's about 270 spaces there that are not being used during the peak time. So overall, in general, I think we're well parked. The trip generation will be accommodated by the roadway network without any deleterious impact. So hope that provided a high-level summary. I'm happy to answer any other questions you have. Thanks.
So the board, I believe, has received a copy of the Creighton Manning report. I would ask that it be also included and referenced in the record. And Mr. Ficciotto also, as a professional engineer, referenced the corner of Old Country Road and Franklin Avenue. I'm just going to make it clear for those of us on the north side of Old Country Road, it's Old Country Road and Mineola Boulevard. So as the board considers the various factors under the village code for this overlay zone, I think it's important we go back. We now have buildings that have been erected in our downtown as part of this overlay zone. I can speak firsthand from my experience with my own children and this next generation that seems to be more dependent now on Uber and mass transit than perhaps we were even just a few years ago. I don't see, nor have I seen, I would guess that the board has not seen the impacts from parking, traffic, and the like that comes from the buildings that have been already approved and built. Those buildings, many of them, if not most of them, being significantly larger, many more units, some of them having well over 300 units, and for a project of this scale, with the parking that is being proposed, with the availability of parking not only on site but also immediately around the corner with the intermodal center, I think it speaks volumes for the availability of parking and the adequacy of the parking that's being proposed here. You think about what can be built on a site like this. What else can be built here? And so you always have to compare. If not residential development, what will go there? Well, the village's code, the underlying code, not the overlay, prioritized historically commercial office buildings. And the kinds of commercial office buildings and uses that prioritizes more traffic, more cars, more trips, more visits, and more intensity of use during peak hours in the village. The downside is you don't have a presence on weekends and in evenings, which was primarily the whole reason for the overlay zone, was to put more feet on the ground in the downtown, and especially in that downtown area where historically the village has not had a residential presence. You know, how important is that? It's important, if we go back and think about the underpinnings of the master plan, that we have people who live there, who are there and active when people come off the train, because all too often when you go back 25, 30 years, or even less, when you'd get off the train in the winter in the evening and it was dark, you may be the only person on the block. And there weren't the kind of presence that we now begin to see in our downtown as a result of the activities of the master plan. So I would just ask the board to contextualize the original intent of the master plan, the 2015 report, and where we are today and where this particular site is. I think we went from a broad view of downtown revitalization and redevelopment, a broad area encompassing the entire overlay zone, and now have prioritized a more strategic approach to redevelopment. And if there was a strategic approach to redevelopment, there's no site that is more fitting, I would argue, than the one that we have before us today. Right at the train station on the south side, immediately impactful, a gateway to the village, not only on the bridge side, but also on the railroad side as people approach. And what are they looking at today? This allows for I think, a building that is actually worthy of our community, and certainly one that will stand the test of time. And the reason that it is not 3 stories and an office building with people coming and going to either doctors' offices or attorneys' offices or both is that you actually need a little more space when you're building apartments. But the intensity of the use in that space is significantly less, and it's complementary. This building will be complementary to the building immediately next door that is now a medical office building where you're going to have doctors with visits scheduled probably every 15 minutes. There's a balancing there, and I think it's that balance that we looked at back in 2005, that we looked at 2015, and that I would urge the board to consider specifically with regard to this site today. You know, there is a visioning here, and this board gets to decide what that's going to actually look like, because as I mentioned before, what you do today will impact the village skyline for generations. Now, I would ask you, because I was listening earlier, you know, to the great presentation by the applicant for the retail restaurant at Morgan Park, 4,000 square feet. It's great application. I think it's going to be a great addition to the village personally. But I would think, and I would ask the board to consider, what is the impact of that restaurant when it's operating? How many tables are they going to have? How many people are going to come and go? How many cars are going to come and go? How many people in that immediate area are going to be impacted by that restaurant in a way that isn't going to be felt by anyone with regard to this building? Different scale, but the impacts are, I would argue, less so with a project like this than with a retail establishment, with a retail restaurant establishment, with people coming and going, tables coming and going, cars coming into the community. This would be a more benign impact and use than what we just heard, even though on scale, certainly a lot smaller than what we're projecting here today. So I would argue that the proposed development is an appropriate use of the land as it was specifically recommended in the comprehensive master plan. It would be serviced by the Mineola Water and Sewer Department, which have the requisite capacity. There is also a comprehensive stormwater management system for the project, which directs all of the stormwater to an on-site stormwater recharge system, eliminating any impacts to the area properties from runoff. And of course, we will continue to coordinate with the village and with the Nassau County Department of Public Works with regard to access to sewer capacity, obviously with Department of Public Works and the Water Department with regard to stormwater and water access as well. You know, I was going to provide an overview, and you see me shuffling through pages here, of the master plan and some of the conversations that we had back in 2005 and leading up to 2005 with the charades that were held and charrettes that were held with John Shapiro, for those of us who remember John, who was our consultant back then. But this is what we were talking about as a village back then and why we wanted to prioritize building housing in the downtown. So yes, it is a building that is 97 feet high. It is a building that could be 10 feet lower if we were to reorganize and rearrange the building to bring the mass closer to Station Road. And I would just urge the board to reconsider if they were inclined to do that, because we just end up with an uglier building. We'd still end up with 121 units. It's not about yield. It's not about the number of units. It's about the right architectural elements and the right building for this spot. And especially here, where we're on the south side of the tracks, where we're away from the residential community in the village, this makes sense. And so with that, Mayor, we can talk about garbage pickup, and we can talk about how garbage is going to be accessed from 3rd Street, and there will be an overhead garage that will allow for carters to drive right in and to pull the garbage and then pull out, so it will not be on the sidewalk, nor will it be seen from the street. We can talk about a plan that has this perhaps breaking ground, subject obviously to the board's approval, sometime more than likely in the beginning of 2024, and a 18 to 24 month build period for this building and for this project. We can talk about the 10,000 square foot event space that will allow for collaboration of public and private use, where we hope to partner with the village to have village events there in the downtown. So for the first time, having a space would be dedicated for the community at the downtown, where we can highlight, you know, our musicians perhaps from the high school, or art exhibits, or frankly any other events, because there would be a shared use of that event space between the building owner and the village as well. Similar to what exists in other communities, but that would serve as a draw to Mineola, immediately adjacent to the train station, so that people could access it in a much more convenient way. So there are elements here, but at its core, it's a building. It's an apartment building for 121 units that has more than enough parking and that is situated in a way that is not going to impact the entire village community, and we would hope that the board would consider it favorably.
Thank you, Mr. Martins. I have a few questions for the architect, if you
course.
don't mind, if you could just
And-
come up.
If I may, let me just highlight this for 1 second. No, I had some free time last night, so I decided.
They're Legos, right? Legos?
I think it's important because in context and proportion, this is really what it would look like proportionately, three-dimensionally. So this is from the station. This is what it would look like if you were looking at it from the east, and obviously, again, on the other side from 3rd Street. So it gives you a sense of context and proportionality, which I think is important. And with your permission, Mayor, I may put it
Yeah.
here
Yeah.
so
Please.
that people can see it, but all right, Mr. Novak put it together. And, I think it
Thank you. Well done. Nice job. Get an A. For the schematic there. Can you talk to us a little bit about the unit sizes? You talked about the breakdown of 65 one-bedroom, 32 two-bedroom, and then 1.5 bedroom. What is the small, no studios?
No studios.
No studios. So what is the smallest unit size? Where do they range from?
Range 700 to 800 square feet.
And the two bedrooms?
2 bedrooms up to 1,200 square feet.
Up to 1,200 square
Yeah.
feet. Okay.
This is more on the luxury type side of apartment buildings.
Can you talk to us, Mr. Martins spoke a little bit about this, but if you can tell us a little bit more about the event space. How big is, and obviously we have all of that in here, but for the public, how big is it? How is it gonna be configured? What are the uses? And certainly if then Mr. Martins wants to interject, or Mr. Mann, or Mr.
Well, I
Levine, what will the space look like aesthetically from an architectural perspective? And what will it look like in terms of its use? So if you could just talk about that event space, and for my part, as we begin to think about development, transit-oriented development, I think it is important that we start to consider having places that are destinations. Many people say to me, you know, we should have a theater in our downtown. We should have, you know, something like they do in Patchogue, or the Space in Westbury, or, you know, the place in Huntington. And those are all great. And if there's anyone out there that would want to build one of those, we certainly would entertain it. But as much as we can control development, I think the message that I've sent out to developers is that we would like to have some kind of destination, some kind of draw to be included in their project, so that it's not just 120 units where people come, they sleep, they get up, they go to work, and then they go perhaps to dinner somewhere else, they perhaps shop somewhere else. We would like a place that other people from other places come to Mineola to eat and shop and spend time here. And I think that a model like this, where you do have an event space that is included, can begin to do that. Is it a movie theater? No, it isn't, but it's a step in a direction that we will become a destination, we will become a draw. And I will say this to Mr. Martin's point before, you know, referencing the earlier application for the retail space in Morgan Park. A 4,000 square foot restaurant that is the 7th in the chain would not be coming to Mineola if it were not for the development that is there already. It just would not be coming here. If there was no Morgan Park, there would be no 4,000 square foot restaurant application. And we can agree, disagree about when, where, how tall, how big, when is enough is enough. I totally understand that, but we do have to, as the 2005 master plan talks about, talking about a critical mass of people, so that people do go to that restaurant, so that people do go to this event space, so that people do go to our downtown. So can you tell us a little bit about the event space and what the use and the purpose and what it will look like?
I could. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask one of the developers to speak on their behalf, on their vision for this. I can tell you it's a 10,000 square foot space. It's 2 stories high. It'll encompass the whole bottom of this building facing the train tracks. But I think I should defer to one of the developers to really, unless Mr. Martin says
Or Mr.
something.
Martins, you could.
Thank you. Yeah, it is, and part of the design of the, part of the design of the building is particularly to not only highlight the event space as that portion that is closest to Station Road, but also to push the rest of the building back away from it, so that if it is going to be used, or when it is used as an event space, that it stands out towards the Station Road and towards the railroad station, with the balance of the building being pushed further back. It was designed with taller ceilings. So you're talking about 13-foot ceilings, lots of windows, lots of light. It is modular. It is not necessarily segmented in any way. It can be used very, I think it can be used almost for anything. It's an open space, and it's being designed as an open space so it can accommodate different types of uses. So on the one hand, you can have a concert, you can have an ensemble, for example, from the high school who can play there as a community event. Some of the events that are held in, by the village, in the park, in the summer, you can encourage those kinds of village-oriented events. At other times in the year when you can actually use an indoor space. It can be used as an art exhibit. And when it's not being used, it will be shut down. There are going to be two small bar areas associated with it. There is a small kitchen, although there won't be any cooking, mostly for heating stuff in the event that there are events held there and food is brought in. But the idea here is the space itself. It won't be a restaurant. It will not be a bar in that sense, but it'll be an event space where, similar if you've been to the space in Westbury on Post Avenue, they have and are able to host different events and have a proper space for it. Now, the one on Post Avenue in Westbury is on Post Avenue. It backs up on a residential community. It's not necessarily, it is fairly close to the train station, but it's certainly not across the street, and it's not in a place that has as much parking as you have right here. This lends itself to this kind of space, not only because of the parking that's available on site, but the parking that's available immediately adjacent at the intermodal center. The use of this space in the evenings and on weekends at a time when the intermodal center is going to probably be at its least peak use. And the opportunity to make use of mass transit to get here, I think lends itself to all kinds of uses, Mayor. But I would be remiss if I did not ask Mr. Levine to actually come up, because as much as this building is a passion for him and has been a big part of his life, dare I say for 15 years, literally 15 years that this project has been in the conceptual phase and gone through, obviously multiple iterations. But this particular spot is sort of the homage to the Levine family, and I'm going to say it to the Levine's father, as it was originally the inspiration for this building to have something in honor of the family. Let me have him talk about it, because this is really part of his dream as well.
Thank you.
Good evening, Board. Thank you. 14 years in the making, but we're here. So, but specifically about the event space. I got involved very early on in the discussion of the concept of an event space. And to be clear, and I'm not a professional speaker, I'm not a lawyer, and lawyers always say you gotta be careful what you say, but I'm the kind of person, I just say it like I see it, so I might as well tell you what it is. This event space, it has a simple vision. First of all, some questions about the architectural dimensions. Without knowing the exact footage, I think it's about either 2/3 or 3/4 event space and 1/3 or 1/4 bar lounge. The bar lounge is right up against the tracks. From a functioning or programming perspective, the concept was when there's no events going on, there would be a place right up against the tracks, primarily after work hours, that anybody getting off the train could stop and go to a nice place and sit down and have a nice drink or maybe have a late business meeting. That's going to have a different feel, and I don't know if you can see the renderings. That's going to have here. Can I pass this to you guys? Oh, okay. That's going to have a little bit of a different feel than Stan's Sports Bar. This is gonna be a place to go, and that's when there's no events. We were very deliberate in what do we want to accomplish. I don't know how many events a year the event space is gonna have for third parties. And when I say a third party, somebody that's gonna come in and do a comedy night, and they're gonna say, we're gonna bring in 5, comedians, and we're gonna have a comedy night. Or a jazz band that's gonna come in and you sell tickets. We don't know how many events a year we're gonna have for that, and to be honest with you, I really didn't care. We committed to this project for the primary reason of creating a multicultural, multifunctional event space for this village. And what does that mean? And when we sat down, I don't know how many nights a year it could be, but these were concepts that we discussed. I remember when I used to, my kids are older now, I have a 24 and a 21-year-old. I remember when I used to have to go to second grade art night, or whatever it was, and you go to the classroom and you look at the pictures and you're like, great, what a beautiful picture of your second grader. And I said, what a great thing if they could have if you could have second grade art exhibit in event space in downtown Mineola, where the second graders get dressed up and they bring their parents and you set up a space like an art exhibit. And then I said the same thing, what about a high school jazz band? What if a high school jazz band, instead of playing in a auditorium, and I don't want to take business away from the schools, if they want to do their shows in the auditoriums, that's great. But what about once a year if you could set it up like cabaret style, and the parents could buy tickets and they could sit in comfortable couches, and a jazz band could play like they're in a jazz, in like a real cabaret night. Fashion shows, holiday shows. That's the vision. Another thing that was discussed was restaurant or no restaurant. There is going to be a kitchen. It's going to be a fully functional kitchen, but it is not going to be a restaurant. Why is it not going to be a restaurant? Because the goal of this place is that people would come to the downtown, go to the restaurants, and then come to the events. And if we were serving all the same food that the restaurants were serving, then we're competing with the other places in the downtown. The sole function of this space, and we were very deliberate in the Levine family owning this space and owning it for forever and a day. I don't want people to hold me against this because we're certainly going to try not to lose money on this space. But this space is not an economic driver. This space is a social and community driver. This space is going to be where people could come and enjoy things for forever and a day. And if that means, maybe a baseball card show wants to come in and all the kids from the village could come and we get a vendor, whatever it is. We're going to open it up to all things like that. We're going to focus on nights and weekends. We are going to try to drive traffic to this downtown, and we're going to try and put on events that are really meaningful and special to the residents of this village. That is the intent of this event space. And we're going to do it in a top-shelf quality setting that everybody would be proud of. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you, Mr. Levine. That does, and as you're speaking, I'm thinking of events that the village, and I know that in the submittals, we talked about a public-private, so that the village would have access to the space for a certain number of days throughout the year that we have yet to agree upon. But, I'm a big proponent of history, obviously, and we have a great historical society. Unfortunately, we don't have the greatest conditions for them. I could see having an exhibition, for a weekend or for several days of all this great stuff that we have kind of tucked away in this very small building on Westbury Avenue, and put it out at this space and have people be able to enjoy it. There are events that happen in the village or on Long Island, centennial celebrations of certain events that we could focus on that. So the concert concept with the schools, we have our Evening Star Quilt, they have their annual show here in our community center. It's very nice, but it would be so much nicer in a space like that. So everything else aside, height and units and all that, I appreciate. I certainly thank you for having that vision and sharing that vision with me, and I believe the board as well, because that's exactly what I want to do, is I want to draw people, our residents, but also residents from neighboring communities to come down here and exactly go eat somewhere else, then go there, or go there and then go eat somewhere else, whether it's just an ice cream or a hamburger or a coffee or a full meal. And I think that this goes a long way in doing it. And certainly, if you maintain a certain level of decorum and the expectation is that this will be a nice place, I think that that's what you will draw. So thank you for including that, and thank you for your commitment to providing that amenity to the village, to the community. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Board.
Thank you. The question I have for Mr. Wortman, I guess, would be school-age children. I know that we talk about that often. As full disclosure, everyone knows I'm a school teacher in the Mineola School District, and although I don't have exact numbers, I can tell you that anecdotally, the developments that we have developed over the last 10 or so years have had a negligible, if any, impact in terms of class size or school size. As a matter of fact, the school district has closed schools, rented schools. They just left Willis Avenue and now bought the old Sperry building for an administration building. So they are giving up teaching space for administrative space. But to this particular project, could you talk a little bit about school-age children and the models and what you expect the impact will be here?
Sure, and thank you, Mr. Mayor, for that anecdote, because it's the type of anecdote we hear in every community where we've been really engaged in TOD type of design. And it's really something that we've seen with multifamily developments throughout the region even, but especially where you have a TOD type of an environment that attracts certain types of households that tend not to have children. Aside from the anecdotes, there have been a number of studies. Once upon a time, there were very few sources for this type of information. We've been lucky enough that over the past several years, as development like this has unfolded in parts of Long Island, that these things have been studied at a local level. And as part of the analysis that we present in our expanded environmental assessment report that's before you, we reference multiple published sources. And what they do is they will take a set of data from existing developments, so that they're taking real counts from real communities that have been built and that are functioning here on the island. And they will survey the local school districts in each of these communities in order to understand and provide on a per unit basis how many children tend to live in these types of developments. In the report, I believe there are 4 studies in particular that are referenced, one of which includes the Real Estate Institute at Stony Brook University as one of the more broad, larger scale and comprehensive studies that's been issued recently. What they've found is that in studying developments across Long Island, different school districts, different types of neighborhoods, communities, that the numbers are very low. And to put a specific number on it, that no matter unit size, et cetera, they tend to fall right around 0.09 school-aged children per unit, which translates to 1 kid for every 11 units on average. What that means here is a very low number. And when we look, at that per unit factor and we apply it here to this development, the estimate would be that there could be as many as 11 children generated by the 121 units here. There are also other studies prepared by an organization known as Vision Long Island. They, I think, focused their efforts around transit-oriented development just like this. And what they've found is an even lower number, 0.03 school-aged children per unit. Applied to a development like this, that would yield an estimate of 4 children living in the 121 units here. Other studies fall in that same exact range. So what we project is that based on these multiple published studies, you could expect between 4 and 11 school-aged children to be generated by the 121 apartments. We also bothered to talk a little bit about the state of the district itself, so that there's some context for that. What does that mean here? Obviously, it's a very low number, less than 1 child per grade level, if you put it in those terms. And what we see in the local district is really a relatively stable enrollment trend over the last 10 or so years of data that's reported to the State Education Department. And it's noteworthy that enrollment, which is in the high 2000s, around 2,700 or so students. It's been stable in that area, but actually the last few years, while all this development is happening in the village, there has been a slight decrease year over year in the past 3 years of data that's been reported. So all of that sort of speaks to that same anecdotal perspective that you offered, that we've heard time and time again with these types of developments, that really the impact on school districts can be expected to be de minimis. I hope that answers that question.
Thank you. I just wanted to, get that on the record.
Sure.
And now I'd have a question for Mr. Filicciotto.
Thank you.
Thank you. So again, for those of us that are familiar with this location, essentially the traffic circulation is in a clockwise, right? So if you come over the bridge, you make a right. To get around to the front of the building, you'd have to make 3 rights, and kind of come out the same way. The question and again, if you were not close enough to see the renderings, the entrance to the subterranean parking would be on the south side of the building on 3rd Street, right? 3rd Street is one way, heading west. My concern is, so everyone that is coming into that building, let's assume that not all of them are taking the train into Manhattan so let's say that some of them are driving somewhere, and now if they come over the bridge, great, they make a right, they pull right in, no problem. But if they're coming from points west, they are going to have to go down to the station itself, and kind of come all the way around. In the morning, the concern would be, as you come out, you could only go west, right? Now you go to 3rd Avenue, and you'd have to make a left on 3rd Avenue, okay? Was there any part of your study that, there's only so many cars that can back up there before it goes past 3rd Avenue, the building that's there? I'm just gonna guess that it's probably in the neighborhood of about 7 to 10 cars max. Are there any concerns that there could be some kind of gridlock at that 3rd and 3rd intersection, 3rd Street and 3rd Avenue, because everyone coming out of the building has to go west, and then they have to go south. They can't go north because that will just put them back. And we do know that there's some of you out there that do make a left out of that Station Road onto Mineola Boulevard, but you're not allowed to. So let's assume that they wouldn't be doing that.
Sure.
So how would you address that? Did you think about that phenomena when you thought about, and would you suggest that there be any changes to the traffic flow on 3rd Street?
It's a great question. So 2 major factors went into this. One, because this is a residential development, not a retail development, it has a very, very, very distinctive entering and exiting pattern throughout the day. So in the morning, obviously, if you are car-based, let's say you don't commute via LIRR, and you're getting in your car and you're going somewhere, the trend at a residential building in the morning is exiting traffic. Very few people are actually coming home at 7 or 8 or 9 in the morning. The data shows some, but it's little. So you're not contending, entering and exiting traffic is not fighting each other as it would with a retail development, where entering and exiting traffic is constant. People are coming and going constantly. So the confluence of entering and exiting traffic is less so in this particular use. The other factor that reduces that opportunity for gridlock, for lack of a better word, is that you don't necessarily need to do the clockwise travel around the building. If you're coming from points west on Old Country Road, you could come up to the signal at Mineola Boulevard, not Franklin, make a left, and then make a left at the next, at Third Avenue, and come in that way. And we looked at both of those because we understand that there could be people who need to pick up family at the porte-cochere on station when they get their car, or if they're coming from a distant area, coming home. They might need to do that clockwise, and we factored that. But we also realized that some people don't need to do that, and they could avoid doing that by coming up to the traffic light at Mineola Boulevard, making a left and another left. So for that reason, we don't expect any congestion, undue congestion resulting from this project, and we don't see a need to alter any of the one-way or any of the circulation back there at all.
Thank you. That's it. I'm sure there'll be other questions. I'm going to pass it off to the Deputy Mayor.
Just, Mayor, if I may,
Yeah, sure,
on a couple of
please.
points. First of all, on the Historical Society, using the space as an exhibit, wonderful idea. For those of us who remember Walter Hobbs, Wally used to talk about the need for a museum because the village's history was so rich, and our ability to actually put that forward, pretty important. And I want to highlight and thank the Historical Society for the great work they do, but what a great idea, because we wouldn't only be displaying it for our own residents, but we would be displaying it for everyone else as well. And I would argue that there probably isn't any community out there that has the history that we do right here in Mineola. So thank you for that. Two, we have our own experience with regard to the impact of multifamily development on our school district right here in Mineola. And if we look at the buildings that have been built already, the occupancies that they have, and the impacts that we know have occurred to the school district, to the statistics and the different studies that Mr. Wortman referenced, I would argue that our own experience is that it's closer to the Vision Long Island result, which was approximately 4 per 100, rather than the 11 per 100. Because if you look at the number of units that have been built in Mineola, I think by last count, at least anecdotally, there are less than 30 children who are going to the school district from all of those apartments, and there are probably, approaching 1,000 apartments that have been built in the village between the various developments. So 121 units is probably going to be closer to the 4 children, not to the 11 children. And lastly, with regard to your point about gridlock, that is a unique spot in the village, that intersection. Nowhere else in the village do we have as much parking as we have at that intersection. Between the Intermodal Center, which has close to 1,000 spots, and immediately across the street, counterintuitively, but immediately across the street, we probably have close to 2,000 parking spots for the hospital parking. And when they let out, that is, the hospitals are changing shifts and people are coming and going from the train station, you would think that there would be gridlock there and that there would be a need to reconfigure just based on the sheer number of parking spots that are in that 2-block area, but it's worked. And so I would just urge the board to consider that 121 units in a building being added to what's already there, I don't think would create a tipping point. If anything, the ability of that intersection to absorb the parking, I think, has been demonstrated simply by the sheer number of parking spots that are there, not only intermodal spots, but the hospital parking spots as well. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor?
Thank you. Well done presentation.
Thank
Thank you
you.
for all the detail and all this detail. I know we laugh about this, but it was very helpful. It's interesting that you keep harkening back to the master plan. I became a resident in 2004, and I was from the boroughs, and being a part of a village that you could actually know what was going on was amazing to me. And seeing you sitting up here as the mayor at the time, presenting the master plan on TV was just unfathomable. I couldn't believe that it was even being done. So it's wonderful to see what the village was that I moved into and what it is today, because it is I mean, almost 10 years, 20 years, but it's beautiful what's happened down here. I think it's reinvigorated, it's inspiring to see what it could be, and bringing this here is just bringing it to the next level. So I appreciate that, thank you. I love that you thought out of the box with this event space. It could be endless opportunities that we could put in there. So it is fantastic. When you were speaking about the event space, though, while we named some wonderful uses for it, you mentioned something about it could be a place for someone to grab a drink after they come off the train. So that just brought up some questions to me about, are you using this as an open bar when it's vacant, or is it going to be locked and closed with just emptiness and look like an abandoned building? Or is it going to be that someone's sitting there with like a little lounge area and it's then used on a regular basis? So I'm just a little confused on what you envision when you said you could come off the train and have a nice place to have a drink.
Yeah,
So I'm a little confused on that.
I'll hope to clarify, and if you need to jump in, please do. I think what Mr. Levine mentioned was that there would be an area closer to Station Road, closer to the train station, where there would be sort of an open lounge. If people want to grab a drink, they can go in there. Quiet area, not a sports bar, not a bar in that sense, more in keeping with the pictures that are here, tied back to, being close to the train station where people can stop in, have a meeting, perhaps grab a beverage while they're waiting for a train to come. But that would be the scale of it, and that would be the area closer to the station. The rest of it would be closed if there wasn't an event taking place.
So for clarity, the vision is a vibrant downtown. And we've all seen and read enough about, empty storefronts and how demoralizing they are. If this place, when it was not having an event, was to be closed, it would effectively look like an empty storefront.
Exactly.
The concept is much simpler in my head than I'm going to be able to articulate it because I've been thinking about it for so long. But the concept is basically, for the most part, almost every day, after work hours, call it 4 o'clock to 10 o'clock, if there is no event going on, and we could get into the architecture of the event space. The event space is going to have a very clear demising wall between the event space and the lounge, which is directly up against the tracks. If there is no third-party event going on, and the event could be anything that we just mentioned, if there's no event going on, the demising wall is going to close off the event space. It is going to be a 20-foot deep lounge. These are roll-up doors in theory. Open up the roll-up doors, especially obviously in the nice weather, and just try and create some kind of vibrancy. Maybe we'll be closed Monday. We'll work out the exact hours. But Tuesday through Friday, 4 o'clock to 10 o'clock, there would be this lounge that people could go, and you see people, and maybe there's some jazz music. And the question came up before. Maybe there's some jazz music playing, and it creates a space that does not look desolate, when nothing's going on. The primary objective, though, is for this place to be an event space that's opening up that demising wall and attracting people to the downtown. So from a functionality perspective, when there is no event going on, and listen, it should only happen, it would be great for the village, and I'll say it on the record. Our intention is to work hand in hand with this village, and I've thought about everything. Security and safety and people and how it's all going to play out. We're going to work hand in hand with the village to make sure that this space is programmed the exact way that the village wants. Along those lines, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, when there's no event going on, the event space will be closed off. The front space directly up against the tracks will be opened up, and it would be a lounge that would try and create vibrancy and try and, who knows, again, keep people that take the train from going straight home. Maybe they stop in there and then they We'll tie it all together in a pretty bow. Maybe they stop in there for a drink and they say, you know what, let's go to Lucharitos. Great.
Bravo.
You had a drink, you went to Lucharitos, and then you go home.
Yeah.
Well, one drink, you know,
But they're walking.
drink
they're just walking
drink
upstairs.
responsibly, but that's the vision. And just so we're clear on the architectural plans, and I don't know the exact dimensions, but I believe the depth of the lounge directly up against the tracks is 20 feet deep, so it's not this massive cavernous, you know, bar space. It's a lounge that you could go in, you could grab a drink, you could meet somebody for a half hour and then go on your way. That would be the programming at all times where it's financially feasible and viable. That would be the programming when there's no event space going on. But there's going to be a demising wall, the space gets closed off, and it becomes a much more intimate space to meet and talk. That's the programming concept.
Thank you. Thank you very much. You addressed exactly what my concern was. I was worried about vacant space when there was not an event happening and it just opening up a different can of worms. So I love the intent you have behind it, and the fact that you'll always have some kind of vibrancy going on there is very important. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, everybody.
I didn't know there were rolled up doors.
See, you learned something tonight
I
too.
did.
So some other things, I appreciate all the engineering and traffic studies and parking studies. I'm not concerned about parking. You clearly have that covered. I live off Old Country Road. I'm going to disagree a little bit on the concerns of the traffic because I personally experience traffic on that road on a daily basis during certain times of the day. Granted, most of it is east of that spot, Mineola Boulevard intersection, but there is a lot of traffic on that road, so mathematically, I appreciate it, but I think there is going to be a little additional traffic to it. Probably nothing that I'm going to notice extremely higher rates than currently, but Old Country Road at certain times of the day is really, really bad. So that's just my observation. So I love the event space, as I said. I think the building has beautiful amenities, architectural details to it. I know you only spoke briefly to the amenities, very appealing. I see you're trying to kind of attract a higher clientele, higher price points, and all these beautiful things that are pretty much usually associated with New York City. So it's nice to be bringing that into Mineola and elevating what's going on in Mineola. So I appreciate that. However, and I get what you're saying, I am concerned over the height. It's going to dwarf a lot of what's going on down there. I know there are some bigger buildings down there. To me, the skyline, even in these renderings, it just seems a little bit too high. So I love that you did the setbacks and the little patio areas and all the things that you've put in there, or the special features, but I still, to me, am concerned about the height. So I just have to be honest about that. But other than that, I think it's a lovely building. I appreciate, again, that you're elevating what's going on and adding to what has already been done down there, because it truly is inspiring to see over 20 years what Mineola is becoming, because it's vibrant. We had a concert down there with people walking around and the restaurant's open, and it's something different. And I'm proud to say that this is where we live, but I am just a little bit concerned on the height. So, and I have one more question for, I guess, the architect. Because of where it's located, is there, and this is just a curiosity thing, is there a special soundproofing or things you have to do in building this building, because there's vibrations from trains and traffic and everything around it?
Yeah, there would be additional soundproofing for that.
And the event space as well?
Correct.
Okay,
Also, it's a concrete building.
got it. Okay.
Yeah, the building, as opposed to some construction that has taken place in the village where they
Stick.
used wood frame
Yes.
and stick built,
Yes.
the plan is to build this in concrete and to incorporate acoustical and dampening, sound dampening in the building itself.
Perfect. Okay. So again, I mean, thank you for bringing this to us. Thank you for thinking outside the box and elevating what's going on down there currently. Just take into consideration the height. That's all I have.
Trustee Casado?
Thank you, Mrs. Martins, good evening.
Good evening.
Good to see you.
Good to see you, trustee.
So I agree with the deputy mayor's concern about the height, and the traffic concern, because it is a mess down there already, and, you know, another building with 121 apartments does bother me. I did have a concern with the traffic flow, which the mayor brought up, and I have a concern with that left turn. You make that second left turn, you got people coming over the bridge, and God forbid, you know, you got to slam on the brakes, so I have a concern with that.
They are not permitted to make that left turn.
No, I'm thinking, no, the left off Old Country and the left onto,
Oh, I see
yeah.
what you're saying,
You are
yes.
permitted.
But with that saying, based on your survey, and the mayor's concerned, there were according to the survey, there were 54 illegal turns made at the intersection. That you can't make a left turn. 54 cars made that with the day this study was made. So that's that. You mentioned on the exhibition performing area, you talked about open space, but you also mentioned that there's going to be 384 seats. Are they like theater seats, or are they going to be like folding chairs? And
As part of the configuration, they had to calculate the capacity of the room, given the size of the room. It doesn't mean that it's going to be set up that way, but if they did set it up with, let's say, folding chairs or chairs like an auditorium, and it would be seated in rows.
It's not going to be like a theater was, you know.
The idea is
rows,
not to
okay.
set it up that way at all, but for purposes of occupancy, they calculate it based on the square footage of the space.
Okay, now I do have a concern. Okay, so it states that the building will be fully sprinkled,
Yes,
right? And I guess that includes the garage area down below?
absolutely.
So the garage area goes down 25 feet, 3 tiers of parking. So as most of you people know, I'm a first responder, and the big issue we have now with these car batteries catching fire, and even water can't extinguish them.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you consider the possibility of people that have battery-operated cars, don't allow them to park, maybe you can let them park above grade or grade level, not 25 feet below.
That's a great,
Something to consider?
it's a great idea. It really is. With the concerns that we've had, not only with car batteries, bicycle batteries, you hear about all the
Yeah,
fires in the
yes,
city.
Yeah, you know, I don't want to see my brother fire is going 25 feet, you know, in a fully involved car
No, that's a
that you
great,
can't even put out.
it's a great point. Thank you. Thank you for bringing it up, because it makes
Okay.
all the sense in the world. Having a designated area closer, or either at surface or closer to the surface, where you
Yeah.
designate your electric vehicles. Great idea.
Something to consider.
Sure.
Okay, now I just have a problem with water and the sanitary. So you listed in Appendix F, there were water bills of 130 Avenue, 199 Second Street, 119 Searing Avenue, and 140 Old Country Road. But over the past years, this board has approved 2 other buildings, the Royal Blue Building on Searing,
Yes.
and then the 111 Second Street, 85 Willis Avenue. Those buildings are like different areas of construction. Eventually, they're going to be occupied. And do you really know if that usage is going to affect your numbers for this building? You know what I'm trying to say here?
Of course. What I would offer is this. The Royal Blue Building, I believe, has just about 60 units that were approved. And the Willis Avenue project, I don't remember offhand how many units, but in the overall scheme of the number of units that have been built, approved, built, and are actually in use right now, proportionately much higher than the ones that we're talking about. They haven't come online yet, but I think the use that is there proportionately will indicate what kind of use we can expect from those buildings will be only a fraction. Similar to this building, you know, for all of its size is 120 units. Some of the buildings that have been built originally in the village, we're talking about 346 units, 300 units, 280 units, or closer to the 300 mark. And so this project and the project you referenced are modestly sized and will proportionally have that much use. So I don't see the system being overwhelmed, and I can assure this board, if there's anything I'm absolutely sure of, that's that Mr. Rini would let us know.
And my final question is, Appendix G shadow study.
Yes.
If you look at the December drawing, it looks like Mineola Boulevard Bridge is always in the shadow,
Well, only at 3 PM.
but also at 10 a.m.
Oh, well, 10 AM, but not from this building. From
That would be,
from the garage.
the garage is currently casting a shadow.
Look at it wrong then?
Yeah, so this is December.
No, it's gonna be, because the sun is gonna be on, the sun's gonna be on this side.
No, at 10 AM, the sun's in the
Yeah, I
south.
mean, the
Sun.
PB, yeah, the PB, yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
the PM, it currently already sits in the shade.
I'm just concerned with, again, in December, it's gonna be maybe 34 degrees. If it ices up, you know, you may not be able to get over the bridge, and you know, it's a county road, it's never gonna get plowed. So I just have a concern, I just have a concern with the shadow effect.
I appreciate that, trustee Casado. I do think that the shadow may actually be in the winter from the parking garage. To put it into context, and I'm glad you brought it up because I was going to bring it up, but this is probably the right time. That parking garage, height, anyone want to guess on how high that parking garage is? We all pass it every day. It's been there since the early or mid-1980s. That parking garage, depending on which side of the parking garage you're measuring from, is anywhere between 77 feet and 85 feet high. That parking garage is 8 or 9 stories tall by linear feet. We're talking about a building here that is stepped back. There are elements to it and architectural elements to it. But to put it into context, that parking garage is a rectangle that is anywhere between 77 and 85 feet high. And so to contextualize that with the building that's being proposed here today, I think is important, because we all think about height somewhat differently. But again, if we kind of figure out what's in the area here, in this rendering that we have here, the 212 Station Road is right next door, then there's a bridge, and on the other side of the bridge is an 85-foot parking garage that's been there for 40-something years. So proportionately, I would argue that a 8 or 9 story parking garage is been there for 40 years. This kind of fits. Just throwing it out there gratuitously as far as whether something is tall or isn't tall. You kind of gauge it by what was and what's there.
Okay, that's it, thank you.
I appreciate it. Thank you, sir.
Trustee Zalowski?
Just a few questions. I know it looks like I have a lot, but some have been answered.
It's the teacher in all of us, isn't it?
It's true.
Trustee
It's
Salowski?
true. My question was the bar being open every day. There wasn't an event being held there. Do you see food being served? Now, I know you have, I think you said 2 commercial kitchens there, and you said that was only for warming food. Do we see on these nights where the bar is open, food being served?
So we've also done a ton of research on that. And again, without being so specific that I'm going to say something that I could get caught up on. The intention is that lounge food that you would see when you go into these lounges anywhere in the country. And what could we be talking about? Charcuterie plates and little finger foods. Yes, if people are going to sit and drink for a couple of hours, they might want to have a snack. And there's going to be a commercial kitchen that can support that. But it's not going to be a full menu with full meals, but there most certainly would be what you would find when, you know, if you could envision, or if you've been to a lounge and they have a lounge menu with lounge food, or I don't like to call it bar food. Again, I don't want to commit to anything. I'm determined not to put a fryer in there, but that's just my own thing. It would be lounge food, and we'll call it lounge food and light bites. So yes.
I like that.
Okay.
Okay.
And, okay, going back to this event space, and you're talking about the kitchen, this event space, do you envision people hosting weddings there?
It certainly could be a possibility. It's going to be an
Okay.
event space for the community.
All right,
100
that's what I'm trying.
100%. If a family wanted to have an event there, it is going to be a third-party event space.
Okay,
The
that's
answer
great.
is yes.
Okay,
But just to be clear, and the mayor alluded to it previously, the priority, not the priority, the mandate would be to accommodate anything that we have to accommodate with the village first, and anything after that, when it becomes an open space, then it's open for, for uses that would benefit the community.
okay. And then that rooftop on the third floor, that would not be open to, say, me. I could not rent that space. That is purely for the tenants? Yes,
That'd be.
but
that-
they
that-
can have events there also,
They
correct?
would have events there, they would use it, it could be a place where they go and sit out, maybe get a little sun, watch the trains come in. It's community space for people in the building.
Are we talking possibly propane gas grills on that at all, where they could?
I don't know that there's been that kind of thought with regard to the use of the space and whether or not there would be grills there, but certainly if there are prohibitions that the village has or concerns about it, we would take our lead from the village.
Okay, thank you. Based on this, you said the building is 97 feet.
Yes,
That's to the top of the building.
to the roof, yes, to the roof.
Are there any mechanicals above that line?
There's a bulkhead above that, because of the elevator shaft, there'll be a bulkhead that extends, I'm guessing probably another 15 feet or so above that. So you're probably looking at, with the bulkhead, an additional 15 feet, 112.
Okay,
But it's not the entire building, it's in a specific area, and only with regard to, servicing the elevators. You'd have to have the elevator, and you'd have to have the staircase up to the roof as well to
Okay.
allow for access.
okay, let me just go, okay. You have 195 spots for these 121 apartments. Every apartment gets a spot, and the additional spots, do they come at a fee? If I was a two-car family, would I have to, or how would I get my additional spot?
The village has had a policy, frankly, forever, with regard to not allowing for anyone to charge for parking spots. So we haven't had that discussion yet, but
Okay.
my understanding is if you have a two-bedroom apartment, you're going to probably qualify for the 2 spots. If you have a 1-bedroom apartment, you probably qualify for the 1, and it would be incorporated into your rent, and there would not be a rental of the parking spots themselves. It would just be part of the apartment use.
Okay, great. And then when you were talking about the construction and demolition, you said it's anticipated that deliveries would occur throughout the workday from Monday to Friday, as well as during the weekends and holidays. What holidays are we talking where delivery?
I can't imagine that there would be any deliveries on Sundays or holidays. I think generically, it's thrown into a report because of any eventuality, but I can't imagine, given the work week, that anyone is going to be actually working on a Sunday. Saturday mornings, perhaps, because at times the trades would have to access the site for that. But I can't imagine that there would be any work taking place on a holiday.
Okay. That might be it. Hold on. Hold on. On page 33, you told us that 1/3 Avenue is 119 feet. You never mentioned how tall Morgan Park is or the Allure. Do you have those numbers?
I
Does
do.
anyone?
I actually do.
Okay.
You know what? I did misspeak. I don't have those here. I have other references to other buildings in the area. I don't have Morgan
Okay,
Park here.
that's fine.
Let me just say that I think Morgan Park, without having the specific height, is the tallest structure in the village, other than the tower and the water tower.
Okay.
That, you know, the building is a bit higher than this one, even to the roof line. And I think my guess is that everything else up to that point was smaller, and everything else after that point is going to be smaller as well.
Okay, that was on the school stuff. Talking about the solid waste. So you are not using the sanitation department at all?
No.
Everything will be picked up by a private carter?
Yes.
Okay.
In keeping with the village's policy
Right,
with regard
okay.
to all of these
I just-
projects. It will be interior kept inside. There'll be a roll-up door on the 3rd Street side, and will allow for access from a truck to be able to go in, pick up, and leave. So it will not be brought out onto the curb, nor will it be, exposed to the public. It will be opened at the time that it's picked up and then closed again.
Okay. Oh, and then the shadow was already answered. Okay, I think that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you. I have another question for the architect, or actually, since Mr. Martins is the one that put this together. You know, I would have liked to have seen that in comparison to the bridge for relative comparison as to the height. So in other words, because, and I got thinking about this as Mr. Martins was talking about the parking garage, how from certain spots it's, 67 feet high, but let's say on the north side, it's 87 foot high, depending on where you're standing. But when you're driving over the bridge, it looks smaller because it's relative to the
Relatively.
bridge. You're not standing at ground level, you're standing 2 or 3 stories high. Would you happen to know, like, how high up? I would imagine that those apartments will probably be the last ones to go. So if you,
have a rendering depicting that,
okay,
if I might.
if you could,
And
please.
and if I may,
You'll do it for homework and next time bring it
I'll
back.
make sure, I'll try and incorporate that, but it's a great point. If you look at the parking garage on the east side of the bridge, the one we just referenced behind 200 Old Country Road, and if you look at the building and structure at Morgan Park, which is right up against the bridge, both structures are literally right at the bridge. This building and this proposal is across the street, so it does provide some distance between the bridge and the front of this building, where I think that perspective will change a little bit, because it won't be right up against the bridge like the other 2 projects are. But to the extent that that rendering provides some perspective, thank you, Mr. Novak.
Yeah.
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 We also should probably have incorporated the MTA's
Yeah,
pedestrian bridge,
pedestrian bridge.
which is itself, I think, probably 4
Pretty-
stories, 5
yeah.
It's and much
pretty-
larger than I think we all expected.
Yeah, pretty significant. To your point, this building will have a street between it and the bridge, so it will be, a good 30 feet further from the bridge than Morgan Park is. And then, remember, if you're looking at Morgan Park, there's just a walkway, and the parking structure, there's also a walkway. So this will be set back slightly from the
Yeah,
bridge.
probably closer to 40, 50 feet when you consider the width of the street plus the sidewalks and the,
Yeah.
so it is going to be a bit removed.
Okay, so let's get,
If I may, we're talking about height and the bridge. The tallest part of this building is facing Old Country Road. So when you're coming over the bridge, you're facing the tallest part of this building. Am I correct?
The-
Because this setback is facing the railroad.
The massing of the building is on the 3rd Street side. If you're looking at it on the Station Road side, there are pieces that come out, but the mass is pushed back.
So,
But from the Old Country Road side,
But-
it's solid building.
But there is no the Rains building is there.
You
to-
will have
Right, which is
Right.
lower, correct.
from,
Right,
from that
that's the
side.
view, coming over the bridge.
That is what you're going to be seeing as you're coming over the bridge here. You have the,
Rains building.
the building in that development there on
Yeah.
the corner, and then access, yes.
Thank you.
Okay, so, Talking Turkey, IDA?
Yes.
Will you be going to the IDA?
We will be having a conversation with the IDA. We have not had any conversations.
Well-
One of the requirements that the IDA has, we all know that there's a 10% set aside for affordable housing. That 10% set aside for affordable housing is pursuant to state law. It allows for the setting of rents up to 130% of area median income, AMI. That's the state law. If you go to the IDA typically imposes a requirement that you actually lower that to 80 to 100% of AMI as a condition of accessing, which then also corresponds to 10% of the units being affected by that, and the rentals affected as well. So that's a decision that they're going to have to make after they've had that conversation. But in the first instance, yes, there is an intent to have that conversation with the IDA.
Do you know what your client will be seeking from the IDA with the length of the pilot?
No, I don't. Typically, though, Mayor, the length of IDA pilots for residential development tend to be between 15 years and 20 years. I think the examples in this village are both, but typically have been 20 years. They go to full market value, although other projects in other areas have sometimes not gone to full market value. But I do note that the Nassau County IDA will now, as a policy, require it to go to full market value, so you don't have any jumps at the end, and that it comes in and factors in so that you're at full market value at the end. My expectation is that it would either be 15 or 20 years. And for clarity, there are certain receivables that the project is receiving right now. That is, in terms of, certain rateables, certain taxes that it's paying, the property is paying. There's a baseline that is negotiated with the IDA, so it does not ever go below whatever the baseline is currently. It only goes up from that. So it will go up. If it is a 15-year pilot, it'll go up about 6 or 7% per year. If it's a 20-year project pilot, it'll go up approximately 5% per year incrementally every year until it reaches full market value. It does not ever go below what it's receiving. And there is a typical, and I think customary with the village, where there are agreements with the village to ensure that the village taxpayers are also made whole.
Okay, I think I don't want to, but like we said, we're not going to vote tonight, so I would like to open it up to public comment so that we can hear from the public, so that you can get some input from them as well, and hopefully come back and answer those questions.
Thank you, Mayor.
So, thank you, Mr. Martins. I'll entertain any questions from anyone in the third row. Come on up. Are you good? Yeah?
Hello,
Good
everyone.
evening.
I am Margaret Ann Farmer. I am born and raised in this village. My notes are a little disjointed, so forgive me. I wrote on the notice about tonight's meeting. As Deputy Mayor Sartori has mentioned, the traffic in this village has drastically changed. I am a resident of this village over 51 years, driving more than 30 of those years, passenger before that, and I remember the traffic patterns, I remember the parking. I am currently seeing a lot of double parking throughout this village. That would be one concern that I would have in this area, especially considering that there has been other development, as we know, down there. The effect on driving time, even if you're not stuck, like you say, in traffic. I have to add 20 to 30 minutes wherever I'm going within this village, whether I am in that downtown area or further north, east, or west. And I am working for this village over 21 years. I'm close enough to walk to work, but there are plenty of times where I need to take my vehicle. And driving my child to assorted after-school activities is 20 to 30 minutes, or we're not getting anywhere on time. We're talking about mentioning the previous businesses, as Mr. Martins had brought up, but I would argue that those are moving into existing buildings as opposed to building a new structure. Your renderings are beautiful. I can't deny that. I do have problems with the height as well. I do not like the height of Morgan Park. I don't want to see anything else that height or even marginally smaller. With the event space, I would also have questions. You are now talking about people coming in. They are not all going to be coming via train. They will be driving. Where will those people be parking? What would the traffic patterns look like? We know the one-way streets in that area, and we're talking about everyday traffic, Monday to Friday. How would that happen when there is an event? We mentioned weddings. I picture a big Long Island wedding, not something small and intimate. I don't know how that would affect guests coming in. That also speaks to the residents in the building themselves. Where do their guests park? Or are we assuming that they're never going to have, company visit? That doesn't seem to make sense to me. I think that it will significantly add to the traffic regardless of what it shows on paper. As someone was mentioning the mathematics of it, I am not so sure about those numbers. Living it for this long and driving it, I see the effects in the village. I am currently the current vice president of the Historical Society. We are looking more for a permanent space as opposed to having something in an event space. While it's beautiful, and I'm sure that it would be utilized well, we would have to be packing up all that precious memorabilia, lugging it down there for a weekend exhibit, packing it up and bringing it back. And that would be in our own vehicles. We're not using village vehicles to do that. So there would be concern in transporting our history, displaying it temporarily, and then transporting it back. My other question would be, we're talking about possibly higher end or luxury apartments. What happens if those are not all filled right away? I think that covers everything I have for now. It's a little bit sloppy. I apologize. Again, the project does look beautiful on paper. There are just some concerns. Mr. Martins mentioned that it was not about the size, the 121 units, but for me personally as a resident, it is about 121 units. I would like to see something a lot smaller than that. Certainly the space needs to be developed as opposed to being vacant as it is now. We moved into this village, my parents, I was born here, but they were in Floral Park at the time. It was a village. If they or I had wanted to live in Queens or Manhattan, that's where we would have purchased homes. And unfortunately, our downtown area is becoming mini Queens. We are not really a village anymore until you get much further away from that. I know that you're not going to stop progress, and it will need to be developed. I just asked the board to consider some of the thoughts of the residents. I know you all had concerns about the height. It's not that it's not a beautiful building. It's just too big in my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Warner. Just to address a couple of issues, and I'll let the applicant answer your questions. In terms of, the Historical Society, I just mentioned that as an example. As you know, and the Historical Society knows, I have been working and trying to find you a permanent place, so that is the ultimate goal. Of course, we don't want to damage any of our historical artifacts. I just thought of that as off the top of my head. Obviously, it would have to be with the Historical Society's permission and participation. As far as filling the apartments, I can tell you that the other developments that we have approved in the last 10 years are literally 100% full with waiting lists. So, and that's a fact. As far as, I've been here 46 years, and Mayor Martins had mentioned this earlier about there were more people in Mineola in 1970 than there were in 2010. Well, there were more people in 1970 than there were in 2020, although that gap is closing. But I will also say this, if you've been here long enough, there were more units built from 1957 to 1967 than there were from 2013 to 2023. That is also a fact. There were over 1,000 units built from 1957 to 1967 in this village than there were in the last 10 years. Again, not to discount anybody's concerns, but just to put it in perspective. Sometimes our perception of what we remember or what things looked like or what we perceive them to be is, in fact, doesn't jive with the facts. And as far as traffic on Mineola Boulevard, I live on Mineola Boulevard, I agree. We have been working with the county tirelessly, Mr. Rini, Mr. Rivera, myself, with Mr. Nicolello, and they have not yet budged on the timing of the lights at First and Mineola Boulevard and Second and Mineola Boulevard. I'm not a traffic engineer, but as I sit at a red light on First and Mineola Boulevard, looking at a green light on Second with no cars there, it just doesn't make any sense to us. I think that is part of the problem. The sequence of the lights on First and Mineola Boulevard is two ways, so green this way, and this way, this way. The one on Mineola Boulevard and Second Street is four ways. They go, then they go, then they go, and then they go. And, you know, that was changed when there was a fatality there a number of years ago. And that of course is tragic, but if you've lived here long enough, you've seen people crossing the street on their phones, diagonally, not using the crosswalk, not paying attention, not watching to cars turn, not to blame pedestrians, but that is something that hopefully will alleviate that traffic concern on Mineola Boulevard. I also think that there's a re-education process for people to use the Willis Avenue underpass now to get to Old Country Road. I use it all the time. I remember sitting in traffic backed up past Corpus Christi. That doesn't happen anymore. Just to put some of those things in context. So yes, we are aware of the traffic. The Historical Society, absolutely, we are looking for a permanent place. This would just be a suggestion. And as far as the apartments, they are full. Anyone else in the third row?
My name is Ed Gavarecki, G-A-W-A-R-E-C-K-I. I'm about a 39-year resident of Mineola, and I worked in Mineola the majority of that time. Luckily, I was one of those people that got to walk to work. That doesn't happen anymore. My wife still works down on Willis Avenue, actually on Willis Avenue in Wilson Park, or Albertson. And I'll pick her up and I leave and I make a right. And to get from there just that way in one direction, what normally takes me 5 minutes, 5 minutes at 7 o'clock in the morning takes me 20 minutes at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And the same thing with the traffic pattern. Suppose there was, like Margaret Ann said, a venue that attracted people from other places and not everybody took the train. You know what kind of a mess that's going to be on Old Country Road trying to come back this way? That's going to be one heck of a mess. You mentioned 1957 to 67, there were over 1,000 units built. None of them were more than 4 stories high. That was the ruling then. They couldn't build more than 4 stories.
They actually,
That was a
Birchwood
county.
Court is higher than 4 stories.
You know what they had to go through to do that?
I'm just saying, you're saying
But
none were
original-
higher
all
than
right,
4
that
stories.
That one was, that was a county
That's-
ruling at that time.
By the way, that's 444 units.
I know.
Okay.
But the majority of them are 4 stories. I live in a 4-story unit that was built in 1966. Searing Avenue was put up behind us. They were supposed to have it 10 feet further away from my building. Didn't happen. They were supposed to put an estate fence up behind there. Didn't happen. A lot of promises are made, but not all of them go through. It's too high. It's a beautiful building, I agree. But that height, it's dwarfing almost everything else except for Morgan Park, which should have been lower also. And something else you did touch upon that just, you said, I can't afford to live in Morgan Park on a teacher's salary or mayor's salary. What are we attracting? I mean, Mineola used to be the working class people's village. A school teacher starting out says, hey, I want to get an apartment. Sure as hell isn't going to move in Morgan Park. He's not going to live in this building. That's going to be probably more expensive than that one. So they got to go elsewhere. So now they commute elsewhere. They're commuting back and forth if they're a Mineola school teacher. That's adding to the traffic. Why not think about, and I'm not talking about low-income housing. I'm talking about regular working guy making that starting new salary. They can't afford it, so they got to commute. You're adding traffic to the village, no matter how you look at it. So think about that when you build another luxury building that we do not need. I'm done.
Thank you.
I'm sorry I didn't write it all down, but
You did just fine. Thank you. Appreciate it. Anybody else in the third row? Anyone in the fourth row? Fifth row? Yep.
Good evening, Tony Lubrano, 159 Jericho Turnpike, Mineola. I'd like to speak in favor of this project. I think, we could support it because it's a beautiful building, but that's not really a reason. And we could also support it because Ross is a great guy who contributes to this. I'm sorry. Sorry. We could support it because Ross is a great guy who supports this village. He's one of our 4 major sponsors to the Chamber of Commerce. It's his contribution that allows us to do a lot of the things that this chamber does, but that's really not a reason to support it either. I think the bottom line is it good for the village? And I'd make the argument that it is. I think that if you look at a place like Farmingdale, they tried for a long time to revitalize that area, and it wasn't until they got something like Croxley Ale House there that provided music, provided a venue, provided a hub that attracted other places there. Same thing can be said about Patchogue with the theater. I think with this event space, you get that hub, and you also get the person who's capable of doing the right thing and bringing the people there. If you look at that Sounds on 2nd Street, for many years, the Chamber tried to do something to bring people down to 2nd Street. We tried a car show there for a couple of years, and it just never took off. And then we did the Sounds on 2nd Street, and I don't know if you guys looked on social media, but everybody was commenting about, and this is residents of Mineola, how great this was. It's about time. They should do this more often. Why don't we do this every week like Garden City does? And I think what changed was 2 things. One is you had a place like Morgan Park that provided a beautiful venue for the area, and you also had a person in the owners of St. James who were willing to step up and make something happen there. And I think you need those 2 parts to the puzzle to make something work. And I think with this project and with Ross, you get both parts of that puzzle. So I think it's a great thing for the village.
Thank you, Mr. LeBron. Anybody else in the 5th row? Anyone in the 6th row?
Good evening. My name is Bill Green, Greene, 224 Jericho Turnpike. I'm not very good at public speaking, so please forgive me. I am a resident. Okay, sorry. I'm a resident as well as a store owner here. So as much as I understand the concerns of the residents, downtown's a totally different area. And I've been here, again, 30 some odd years. I think this is a wonderful project, something that's very important to fill that area that's been a bit of an eyesore for a long time. To Tony's point, all the different things that are going on downtown, this could be another thing that could certainly help it. There's another point I want to bring out to the residents. The village business owners absorb half of the taxes in this village, and I think that's really important to note. So by bringing a venue like this downtown and bringing more people into town are going to keep the businesses together. I'm a small business owner myself, so we have a motto at the Chamber is you can find anything in Mineola, and you really can. And I'm sure all of us out here have Prime throwing Amazon boxes on your steps where you could find things that you could probably purchase locally, but we don't do that. And again, I want to reiterate that because I get my tax bills all the time, and my taxes on my building are extremely high. And again, we absorb, if I'm not mistaken, half of the budget for the year is paid for by small businesses. And something like this, I think, is only going to bring more people into town to spend more money, and that should certainly help all of our tax bases. So again, thank you, and I love the building, Ross. It's great.
Seventh row? Yep.
Good evening. Andrew Ward, Wisteria Avenue, Mineola. I think this is a really positive project, and it's the first time I'm seeing it in photos. I didn't see a site plan, but from what I've seen, it's well done. I think the board members are asking excellent questions, and I think a lot of your questions deserve some further analysis, and I'm sure you guys will do that all. I just wanted to mention a few things. I like the setbacks on this building, though I couldn't tell if the buildings were built right up to the sidewalk. It's hard to see from the photos, but I think there should be some space between the sidewalks and where the buildings begin on all three sides. I like the fact that there was an event space, but I'm kind of confused because it sounds more like a catering hall, and I think you guys have some similar questions because that attracts a lot of people. I'm not against people, but I think that has to be considered in the overall scheme of this project. It's hard to tell if it's a bar or a catering hall, or you can walk in at any time. I envision more, when I first heard about an event space, it would be like the Village Green that is open to the public from a certain hour in the morning to a certain time in the afternoon, and folks can come and go freely, as well as the residents of the building. But I didn't read the environmental review, but I've worked with Mr. Wortman at VHB for many years, and I have full confidence it's an excellent report, sir. I was trying to understand, but I can't tell if there's a place for cars to pull in to drop off the residents and or Uber drivers and Lyft drivers and such, because the fact of the matter is those three streets that border this new building have no parking at any time. And besides the Lyft companies and moving companies and flower delivery people, it's hard to tell where that's all going to transpire. The train station still is building out some of what looks like might be metered parking, but I can't tell. That should be looked at a little. The traffic study, though it's covering all the residents' parking, it doesn't seem to cover what will be an event space that is possibly bringing in weddings or other events, as was mentioned. I think that should be reviewed. And there was a lot of talk tonight about the master plan, and I was in the village at the time, and the master plan it's probably 15 or 18 years old now, but it was designed back in the day to bring stability to the downtown, because there was a lot of vacant spaces, there was empty lots, there was a lot of derelict sites and such, and part of that master plan was to bring stability to both building up the downtown to make it more attractive for businesses, for residents, and it's been proven to work over time. But part of the stability, I believe, is to it was discussed at the time. Many of the new businesses would bring in tax revenue that would offset some of the folks who lived here, the homeowners and such. And it, in my opinion, has many of these projects have gone to the IDA, and I'm glad you brought that up, because in a situation like this building, this project, if it gets a 20-year abatement, we won't have full tax valuation till sometime in 2045. And I, as my opinion, don't believe that's fair. Many of the local businesses spoke here. Most of their buildings, they're paying full tax valuation on. This village, in this project, they're seeking relief, and it was mentioned, and I wrote it down, for three things, in fact. One was site coverage, they need relief. One was setbacks, they need relief. And the third was in height. So those are all very valuable things that have to be considered. And being that we are, speaking to them, I'm sure you guys have been speaking for many months, but I believe that our relief is worth something. And when it comes time to go to the IDA, I know there was talk of 15 or 20 years. Maybe we look at 8 to 10 years so we can start getting some of the tax revenue from the buildings that are being built. We've built close to 1,200 apartments since the master plan was built downtown. And essentially, from my knowledge, they're all being abated by the IDA, which is an independent state agency. I think that's really important, and I would like to make sure that is considered by the board. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ward. I will say that we have not had the discussions about, Mr. Martin's mentioned about making the community whole on the taxation part, a host community benefits agreement, which, as you know, has been what we have traditionally done. And we also have, for those variances of height, lot coverage, and setbacks, we have also received amenities, among other things, including cash. The $2 million refurbishment of Memorial Park was done, was made possible
Yes.
literally
Yes, I
from
remember.
an amenity from one of these developments. But that is not to say that your points are absolutely valid. They are absolutely something that we take into consideration, and we do protect the village taxpayer as much as we can. As you said, the IDA, we do not, you know, there's this notion, we do not give tax breaks. The village of Mineola does not give tax breaks. Of course, the question then becomes, well, then you can deny the project. Yes, absolutely, you could also deny the project. But if we like the project and it fits into our vision and our master plan of downtown, and if the applicant chooses to go to the Nassau County IDA, and the Nassau County IDA decides to give them an abatement, and in some situations, what we've seen is, even with an abatement, you take, for example, where 1/3 Avenue is, that was the old LIPA building, that paid 0 taxes, right? So that went from 0 to a large number, and eventually, when it comes off the abatement and goes full taxation, that will be a really significant number. So there are many variables, but point well taken, well made. I can tell you that this board and previous boards, when it comes to protecting this village, we certainly make sure that we get more than our fair share, that we get something for giving the variances, and that we are made whole from the decisions made from an outside agency. And the school district has the ability to do their due diligence, meet with the developers, or go to the IDA, which I know they have in the past, to speak out against it, which of course they are entitled to. But yeah, that we're not even at that point yet in the conversation. So
Yeah, just planting the seeds.
yeah, but
I'm planting the seeds.
yeah, the seed's been planted a long
Thank you.
time ago. Thank you, Mr. Ward. We really appreciate it. Anyone else in the last row?
Hey, Mayor Pereira, members of the town village board. Eric Alexander, I'm the director of Vision Long Island. We're a downtown planning organization. We don't live in Mineola, as you guys know. But I wanted to I heard a lot of questions tonight from folks, and it really a fantastic presentation. I wanted to just make 5 quick comments, because I know the hour's late. So, but just on these projects, we have worked through the years, over 25 years, on trying to, see and plan over 16,000 units of transit-oriented development. We've been in these hearing rooms when you've approved past projects, and so it's great to see continued, and great to see 2 new businesses. And by the way, Lit Churritos is great in Greenport. My wife and I love that. We always go out there. It's like a stop. So good job in getting 2 businesses in tonight. But 5 quick points. 1, to the question that there is a challenge related to the housing market, the multifamily housing market is the strongest of all major developments, particularly on Long Island and within the region. So, retail and office are in the weakest places. Industrial's doing okay, but multifamily is still very strong and very bankable in the region. So I don't think you're going to have a problem filling that up. And of the 150 projects we've tracked, they're anywhere between 85 to 95% full. So there's really not a challenge with that. We're excited that there's an event space in the project, and those have been so key. There have been 11 communities that have created some form of theater, events, destinations, and that is such a complementary piece. And the way you're doing it from a kind of community perspective is really valuable. And I think, you know, Village of Babylon has done that, Village of Lindenhurst is doing that actively. I can go on and on and on, I don't want to spend so much time, but again, these 11, actually 12 communities that have done this in different ways, different sizes. It's so important to the restaurants and the bars and the other retail and your downtown, but also the community. So it's really unique, and I applaud the developer, Mr. Levine, who we know well, in that part of it. The school kids issue came up, and really the other issues related to the viability from a community perspective. You know, we did the study that said 3 kids per 100 units on average, and the reason for that is the Stony Brook study used a lot of 3-bedroom units, and we counted mostly 1 and 2s, because we looked at 100-unit projects or higher that had been built, and we tied it out with school district data, right? So when you look at 1s and 2s, you're just not creating as many kids. And I could say, and I could put my hand on a stack of Bibles and say, look, I've been in about 60 multifamily developments. I've not seen a single kid, like walking through the hall. There's not like kids there. I'm sure they're there, but it's not meant for kids. This is not, the amenities within these buildings are not just kid-friendly the same way. You know, they're really meant for people at different times of life. And again, there's, so if you're talking about aging, if you're talking about, baby boomers aging out of their houses, Gen X is aging, Gen Xers like me, millennials, and Gen Zs now, you got 4 market groups that want multifamily housing and lively downtowns, So that's who generally is filling these things up. So that's the school district thing. The tax positive nature of these projects, even with the pilots, has been proven out. It's hard to explain that, but I think when you really dive into what that lot's paying now versus what it will pay, and we oftentimes hear from single-family home residents, they complain about, wait a second, these former multifamily developments don't pay their share. It's like, actually, single-family homes don't pay their fair share. You could have 1 single-family home with 3 kids, and that could be more than an entire building of 100 units. And so you got to look at what that tax of 100 units pays. So I think we got to have an apples-to-apples comparison to understand. It's a challenge in every community to kind of coordinate and articulate. So I totally get it. All right, so that was my 3rd point. I'm sorry, I'm skipping all over the place. I think we manage a Main Street Alliance of 45 different downtowns, and all of them have gone through this coronavirus issue, like everybody, right? Trying to manage, how do we keep our small businesses thriving, and what are the types of new development that's going to help? They all say multifamily will help, number 1. Number 2, they do say that, whether it be the outdoor dining, I heard about the Mineola Sounds, haven't made it down yet, but I think that is the type of thing that other downtowns are doing, and they have 24, it's like there's 24/7 activity. And I think that's part of the vision of what this development has, is to have some form of activity that draws people in. And the successful downtowns are doing. I was in Lindenhurst the other night, and they've got something each night. And who knew? You can go to Lindenhurst, and there's all this stuff going on. And Mayor, you and I had a conversation about how Mineola is really kind of stepping up their game, and there's more activities happening down here. So downtown events are booming across the island, so the fact that you guys take advantage of that market, more people are doing staycations, more people are staying local, so that is really important. And no one mentioned this today, but I just want to make it clear, and I know you guys know this, but there's sometimes misunderstandings and misperceptions about multifamily housing. So much of the multifamily housing planned on the island, certainly in Mineola, was planned locally. It was planned with civics, chambers, historical societies, all the different groups that are a part of the fabric of deciding stuff in a local community. Over the last 18 months, we heard some strange conversations coming out of Albany about how they're going to plan and tell us what to do, and no one we know on Long Island wanted that. No one we know on Long Island asked for that. 200 elected officials came out against it, and that's not what's happening here, right? From what I could tell in any way, shape, or form. So I just want to, sometimes you get things on social media where people say strange things, and it's like these types of proposals. Again, if this proposal came forward 7, 8 years ago, planning locally is appropriate because things get vetted. This project now is different than it was then, and it's for the better from what I can tell. With that, again, it's not my place as an outside group to say yay or nay. Our organization certainly likes the project and certainly respects the developer and the work that's being done here. and we look forward to your continued deliberations. So thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mr. Alexander. And if I may go completely off script here, starting next Friday, the 23rd, we're going to have a farmer's market here in the village, and that's to the point of trying to draw people in. Sounds on Second, concerts down in our Memorial Park, and we have partnered with a local Long Island farmers who will come over once a week and have fresh fruits and vegetables and crafts, and hopefully it'll work. It's worth a try, but it's those types of things, because if we do nothing, then, you know, it's, so.
Next to the firehouse.
Oh, I'm sorry, it's going to be on Jericho Turnpike between the firehouse and Lisbon Liquors, that parking lot there, next to the Water Society, next to the well, the water well there, so right on Jericho Turnpike. You'll be hearing a lot more about it in the coming days, so we just kind of solidified that today. So I know it has nothing to do with this application, but I just thought that since Mr. Alexander was talking about things that are going on in other villages, you know, there are things happening here in Mineola as well, so looking forward to it. Thank you. Anyone else in the public wishing to speak? Mr. Martins.
Thank you, Mayor, and I want to thank the residents who came out to provide insight and perspective with regard to this project. It's 9:30 at night on a Wednesday, and people wouldn't be here unless they cared, and I appreciate that. I guess I'll start in reverse order, and not in any particular way, but I do want to make it clear that, as has been the custom for the village, there will be a host community benefit agreement between this project and the village in the event that the project is approved, like the other projects. There are mechanisms whereby the village taxpayers are made whole, and that these developments have, because of the nature of the developments over time, added hundreds of thousands of dollars in annually recurring revenue to the village from day one, and increasing revenue to the town, the county, and the school district over time. And so certainly there is significant more revenue coming to the village and to all facets from day one. Village is made whole. The other taxing jurisdictions are made whole incrementally. And so to that point, if you go back and look, and there are now examples and along that timeline, and I encourage the board to do that. You know, I've had the opportunity to speak to the superintendent of the Mineola School District about the impact of these projects on the school district, and there's no doubt there has been significant revenue that's gone to the school district as a result of decisions that have been made to help with downtown revitalization and have inured to the benefit of the student body. There are some technical issues that we're going to have to deal with, having to do with tax caps and pilots and how they are calculated, but that's a technical issue. In real terms, there is more revenue and money available and will be increasing each year as those pilots come to full market value. I guess the second point I would raise is that, and to Mr. Ward's point, there is a notch or an area in the front of the building on the Station Road portion that goes back towards Third along the bridge where the front of the building is, that will allow for a car to come off of Station Road and actually drop or pick somebody off so that they will not be parked and blocking traffic. You know, I too have noticed, and I think we all have, and the deputy mayor mentioned traffic. I think anyone who's been on Old Country Road or Jericho Turnpike during peak hours has seen it. I think, you know, I often forget what peak hours are anymore, because sometimes when you think for sure that there isn't going to be traffic because you're either going on a Saturday or at some other time, there happens to be traffic. I don't know that those are necessarily attributed to any particular project, or that we should overemphasize one project or the other. But I would ask that if we go and look at places like Morgan Park and the number of units that are there, and a project that is multiples of the project that we're proposing here, I haven't seen that level of gridlock on 2nd Street or in the immediate area because of cars coming and going from Morgan Park. Yes, we'll see it on Old Country Road. Yes, we'll see it on Jericho Turnpike. It's there. We used to see it on Willis Avenue more so when there was, before we put in the grade crossing elimination project was built. But those are not and cannot be attributed to any particular project. And to suggest that a 120-unit building is going to be the difference between the kind of traffic that we're seeing or not, when compared to all of the other traffic generating malls, office buildings, courthouses, and everything else that feeds into it, parking garages tied to hospitals, the sheer scope and scale of traffic and parking and vehicle traffic is not going to be, I would argue, affected by 120 units, but yes, by other things, and perhaps greater control and greater alignment of traffic control devices would go a long way towards fixing the issue, as opposed to standing as a negative for what is a residential project. But it begs the question, because we all agree, I think, that this place, this particular area, this piece of property needs something else there. It cannot continue to be an abandoned taxi stand with cars there, buildings that are underutilized in a critical and central area for the village. And so when you consider the alternatives, I would argue that residential housing is by far the least impactful use that you're going to have here. The village code actually allows for commercial building and a commercial office building. And I would suggest that in this context, that would be a far more difficult use, a far more impactful use, and a far less beneficial use to the village than what is being proposed here today. These things don't come up in a vacuum. No one will decide that they'll come in with with an alternative, or certainly it's not going to be a park. It's going to be something. And if it were easy, this property would not have stayed vacant, and as it has been for the last 15 years. But this is a great project. It's 121 residential units. And the alternative is that there's going to be a commercial building there. And those commercial buildings are going to be tied to perhaps the most likely use in the area would be medical use, and perhaps considering that as an alternative, those impacts from what we've heard tonight are only going to be exacerbated. Not only traffic, but the impacts on our facilities, resources, and the like. So I'm concerned because it is not a zero-sum game. There are alternatives. But when we talk about impacts to the downtown, providing for housing flexibility, providing for what we think is a rather low impact use for this property with benefits to the village in a way that is, I think, complementary to the uses that are already in the downtown, which are generally and historically commercial. So be it. I think the choice is not between zero and this project. It's between something else and this project. And if it's not this, then it begs the question of what and when. It really does. And so what I would suggest is the reason for projects like this is that there has to be a certain scale to make the kind of investment that is necessary to build an apartment building. And so in order to justify the investment itself, it has to be on a scale that allows that to happen. And so, you can't build a 10-unit apartment building in a place like this because it just doesn't lend itself. The economics don't work. And that's why a project like this comes before the board. And as far as affordability, You know, I used to remember, I think, when my parents bought their first house on Raff Avenue here in the village, I think they may have paid $20,000 sometime in the early 70s. I heard recently that a house up the block from ours on the east side of Sheridan Boulevard recently sold for over $1 million. The affordability issue here, whether it's apartments or whether it's housing itself, is what it is. Some people would consider it progress. The fact that a home in Mineola costs as much as it does is a sign of just what a wonderful place I think it is to live in this great village. These apartments are going to get market rates. Those market rates are going to be set by demand. And as Mayor, I think you mentioned, there is a demand. There is a waiting list, and people are paying a lot of money for these apartments. I think that's also a testament to the great job and the reason that people want to live in this village. And it comes with other things as well: disposable income, support for our downtown, support for our business community. But you know, the affordability component here is built in by state law with the 10% set aside and with the tie to AMI and the requirements that be checked, so that 10% of all the units actually have to reach and meet an affordability component. And again, we hope that the board considers this application favorably. We hope that you look at it in the context at which it is being presented. If it is, in fact, an event space that allows for greater use and community benefit and a meeting place for the village that is accessible when the weather isn't beautiful, as we've had during our summer concerts in Memorial Park. It could be that kind of a space as well, collaboratively between the developer and the village. I would be hopeful that we'd be able to have exhibits. I would also be hopeful that we'd be able to have exhibits from the Historical Society, because I do think the history of this village is extraordinary, and it would be great to highlight that until such time when there is a permanent location. When that happens, great. It'd be great to have that exhibit and all of that material stored safely somewhere. But I do know that the Historical Society has extraordinary exhibit and extraordinary pieces, and it would be great to be able to display that to people who would otherwise never have the opportunity to see it. Maybe this is an opportunity for that. We'll see what happens if and when the board considers this application favorably. But we stand ready to certainly work with the board, and as Mr. Gibbons knows, we stand ready to prepare a host benefit agreement for the village and a make-whole agreement, so that those issues of taxes and paying fair share are also addressed like every other project.
Thank you, Mr. Martins. Does anyone else from the board want to make any comments? Obviously, when we started this hearing, it was with the intention that we would continue the hearing. And as I said last week, I encouraged during my public comments for the public to come out. I will say it again, that we will move this to July 12th. Mr. Gibbons? When would it be? July 12th, I believe, the second Wednesday of July. July 12th. Would be the continuation of this hearing. I would encourage those residents that are here today to come back, and I would encourage any other residents that are there, that are out there hearing this to please come out on July 12th, as we would continue this hearing then. And by that time, we will have had would we have had a decision, Mr. Gibbons, from the Nassau County Planning Commission by that time?
I suspect we will.
Okay. Because tomorrow.
I suspect you'll have a decision from the Nassau County Planning Commission tomorrow.
Okay. So by that time, then we will know that. We, the board, will look at this more closely, take the testimony that was given today, and we will be in touch with you to see how we can move forward with this, if we can move forward with this. And again, we'll, for those of you who cannot come, you can certainly send letters and we can submit them into the record. You can send emails to me and we can submit them into the record. The record is essentially open from now until July 12th. So would nobody else have any other comments? I make a motion to continue this hearing to the July 12th meeting.
Motion.
Motion by Deputy Mayor Sartori, seconded by Trustee Casado. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. We'll give everyone a few
Thank you.
minutes. We do have a work session coming up, so we'll give everyone a few minutes to clear the room. Thank you. Have a great day, and we'll see you at the Shakespeare in the Park this Friday.